North America. A continent defined by its staggering geography. From the granite monoliths of Yosemite in California to the geothermal wonderlands of Yellowstone, from the rugged, ice-capped peaks of Yoho and Jasper in Canada to the endless, rolling grasslands of the Midwest. These national parks are the crown jewels of the continent. They are places of profound beauty, silence, and solitude. Every year, millions upon millions of tourists leave the safety of their cities to flock to these regions. They come seeking peace. They come to hike, to hunt, and to witness the raw majesty of nature. For the vast majority, the experience is life-changing in the best possible way. They take their photographs, they breathe the fresh alpine air, and they return home safely. But there is a darker statistic hidden beneath the canopy of these ancient forests. It is a truth that park authorities are hesitant to discuss, and one that terrifyingly suggests that these parks are not just playgrounds for the adventurous, they are hunting grounds for the unknown. It is expected that in rugged terrain, accidents happen. People fall. Hikers get disoriented. Hunters succumb to the elements. In 99% of these cases, search and rescue teams, aided by modern technology, locate the missing individual within 48 hours. They are found tired, hungry, perhaps injured, but alive. But then, there are the others. The fraction of a percentage that defies all logic. These are the people who vanish in the blink of an eye, often leaving no tracks, no scent for dogs to follow, and no trace of their existence. When they are found, if they are found at all, they are discovered in locations that are physically impossible for them to have reached, or in a state that science cannot easily explain. This phenomenon has been dubbed by some as the silent mass disaster of the nation. And for years, it went largely unnoticed, until one man decided to ask the question, what is actually happening in the woods? Enter David Paulides. A former police officer and detective with over 20 years of law enforcement experience, Paulides was a man trained in facts, evidence, and criminal profiling. He was not a man given to flights of fancy or ghost stories. His journey into this dark rabbit hole began by pure chance. While visiting a national park for research on a completely different subject, Paulides was approached by an off-duty park ranger. The ranger was visibly anxious. He told Paulides that he was worried. He claimed that he and his colleagues had been participating in search and rescue operations for people who had vanished under baffling circumstances. But the most disturbing part? The ranger claimed the National Park Service was not keeping a centralized database of these missing persons. It was as if the system was designed to forget them. Intrigued, and being an accomplished outdoorsman himself, Paulides accepted the challenge. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests. He scoured archives in small-town libraries. He spoke to families left behind. What he found was shocking. Paulides catalogued thousands of cases, eventually compiling them into a series of books titled Missing 411. He realized that this wasn't just random bad luck. There was a profile. He began to filter the cases. He removed anyone with a history of mental illness. He removed cases with clear evidence of animal predation. He removed runaways and obvious criminal foul play. He was left with the residue, the impossible cases. He noticed clusters. These disappearances weren't evenly spread, they were concentrated in specific zones, the Great Lakes, the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevadas. He noticed weather anomalies. Almost immediately after someone vanished, a severe storm would often roll in, washing away footprints and grounding search helicopters. And perhaps most chillingly, he noticed that the victims often vanished near berries, granite boulder fields, or swamps. Paulides concluded that something intelligent, patient, and elusive is operating in the wilds of North America. Something that hunts. To understand the terror of these cases, we must look at the specific details. One of the most famous, and heartbreaking, is the case of Dennis Martin. It was June 14, 1969. Father's Day weekend. The Martin family had traveled to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a place of dense, ancient woodlands and rolling fog. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was there with his father, his grandfather, and his older brother. They hiked to a popular area known as Spence Field, a grassy clearing surrounded by thick forest. At around 4 p.m., the adults sat on the grass, chatting. Dennis, his brother, and 2 other boys decided to play a prank. They planned to hide in the bushes and jump out to scare the adults. The boys split up. 3 went one way. Dennis, wearing a bright red shirt, went the other way, stepping behind a bush near the tree line. A few minutes later, the signal was given. The 3 other boys jumped out, laughing. But Dennis did not. His father, William Martin, waited. A minute passed. Then 2. He stood up, calling Dennis's name. He walked over to the bush where his son had been seen just moments before. Dennis was gone. William Martin immediately began to run. He sprinted nearly 2 miles down the Appalachian Trail, screaming his son's name, thinking perhaps the boy had wandered off. But there was silence. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the National Park Service. Over 1,400 people flooded the area. This included the National Guard, season trackers, and specialized aircraft. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. A team of heavily armed Green Berets, special forces soldiers usually reserved for national security threats, arrived on the scene. They set up their own camp, communicated only with each other, and refused to share information with the local searchers. Why were they there? And why were they armed? Despite this massive manpower, covering 56 square miles of terrain, not a single scrap of clothing, no footprint, and no trace of Dennis Martin was ever found. However, there was a clue. A clue that was buried for years. On the same afternoon Dennis vanished, a family named Key was hiking near Rowan's Creek, several miles away. They heard an enormous, sickening scream, unnatural, they called it. Looking toward the sound, they saw something on a ridge above them. They described it as a rough-looking man, or a wild man, running through the trees. But he wasn't running normally. He was dodging through the brush with incredible speed, and over his shoulder, he was carrying something. Or someone. The witness thought it looked like a small child. The FBI interviewed the family but dismissed the sighting. They claimed the time frame was too short, that no one could hike from Spence Field to Rowan's Creek in the time between Dennis's disappearance and the sighting. Years later, a master tracker and ranger named Dwight McCarter proved the FBI wrong. He hiked the route himself. He did it in the exact time frame required. The authorities had ignored the only potential lead. Dennis Martin was never seen again. The Martin case established a terrifying precedent, the speed of the vanishing. This is a recurring theme in the missing 411 files. Take the case of Trenny Gibson. In October 1976, Trenny, a high school student, was on a field trip in the Great Smoky Mountains. She was hiking with 40 classmates. The group was moving toward a spot called Andrews Bald. The students had split into small groups based on walking speed. Trenny was walking just ahead of her friends. She turned a corner on the trail. Her friends, only seconds behind her, turned the same corner. Trenny was gone. The path she was on was bordered by a steep drop-off on one side and a sheer vertical rise on the other. If she had fallen, her friends would have heard the crash of her body through the undergrowth. If she had climbed up, she would have been visible. Her friends noted that just before she vanished, she had stopped and looked into the woods, as if something had caught her eye. She stepped off the trail, and in that split second of being out of sight, she ceased to exist. Massive searches yielded nothing. No backpack. No shoes. No Trenny. This instantaneous disappearance occurred again decades later, in July 2010, on the snowy slopes of Mount Rainier. Eric Lewis, an experienced climber, was ascending the mountain with 2 partners. In mountaineering, safety is paramount, so the 3 men were tied together by a safety rope, spaced 20 to 30 meters apart. The lead climber stopped at 14,000 feet to rest. The second climber joined him. They waited for Eric, who was the anchor at the back. They tugged on the rope. It was light. They reeled it in, only to find the end of the rope empty. Eric had detached from his safety line. Why? To unclip in the middle of a glaciated slope is suicidal. Yet, he had done so. Just moments before, he was there. Now, only the wind remained. Searchers later found his harness and shovel at a lower altitude, but Eric Lewis had simply evaporated into the white void. David Paulides also identified a disturbing pattern regarding how bodies are found, when they are found. In 1975, a young photographer named Charles McCullough vanished at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. He was there to take photos of the winter snowscapes. The snow was deep, over 7 feet of fresh powder had fallen. Charles never returned. The initial search was hampered by the weather, but come spring, the thaw revealed a gruesome scene. 2 hikers found a backpack 12 miles from the trailhead, a distance that would have been excruciating to traverse in 7 feet of snow without snowshoes or a snowmobile, neither of which Charles had. Rangers arrived to investigate. They found Charles's jeans. But they weren't lying on the ground. The jeans were unbuttoned, sitting upright on a log. Inside the pant legs, they found the bones of his feet and shins. It looked, according to witnesses, as if he had simply melted out of his clothes. 12 feet away, they found the top of his skull. No other bones were found. His shirt, his coat, and his boots were missing. How does a man walk 12 miles through deep powder, take off his clothes, and die in such a bizarre position? The medical examiners could not determine a cause of death. We see similar impossibilities in the case of Bart Schleyer. Bart was not a tourist. He was a scientist, a master outdoorsman, and a hunter. He was the kind of man who knew the woods better than anyone. In 2004, he flew into the remote Yukon Territory for a moose hunt. He was dropped off by a floatplane. When the pilot returned 2 weeks later to pick him up, the camp was pristine. Bart's food was untouched. His equipment was organized. But Bart was gone. Years of searching eventually led to the discovery of a tiny fragment of his skull and a few teeth, 60 yards from his camp. Nearby, his bow was leaning against a tree, and his dry bag was on the ground, indented as if he had been sitting on it. The authorities tested local wolf and bear scat, looking for human DNA, thinking he had been eaten. They found nothing. There was no blood. No signs of a struggle. No shredded clothing. If a bear attacks a man, it is a violent, messy event. It destroys the camp, it tears up the ground. Here, it was as if Bart had been sitting quietly on his bag, waiting for game, and was simply plucked from the face of the earth by something that left no trace. While many of these cases happen in deep wilderness, some occur terrifyingly close to civilization. Christopher Tompkins was a surveyor working in Harris County, Georgia, in 2002. He was working with a crew of 4 men. They were walking in a line along a barbed wire fence near a wooded area. They were spaced 50 feet apart. Christopher was at the back of the line. The man in front of him turned around to speak to Christopher. In that few seconds, Christopher had vanished. The crew ran back. They found one of Christopher's work boots hanging on the barbed wire fence, as if he had been yanked upward violently. On the ground, they found 12 cents, coins that had fallen from his pocket. The implication is chilling. For coins to fall out of a pocket, the person usually has to be turned upside down. Christopher was never found. Only that single boot remained as a testament to his abduction. Then there is the disturbing correlation with water. Paulides notes that many victims are found in bodies of water that have already been searched. Todd Geib, a 22-year-old from Michigan, vanished after a party in June 2005. He called a friend at 12:51 a.m. He was out of breath. He said 2 words, "I'm in a field." Then the line went dead. Extensive searches of the area, including the local lakes, turned up nothing. Yet, 3 weeks later, Todd's body was found standing upright in a lake that had been dragged and searched multiple times. The autopsy ruled it a drowning. But there was very little water in his lungs, and his blood alcohol level was low. How does a man drown without inhaling water? And how does he remain undiscovered in a small lake for 3 weeks, only to appear vertically in the water later? So, what is happening? Skeptics argue that these are simply tragedies of nature. They cite paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where people suffering from severe hypothermia feel irrationally hot and strip off their clothes before dying. This explains the naked bodies. They argue that animals scatter bones, and that water hides bodies well. And they are right, in many cases. But they cannot explain the silence. They cannot explain the lack of tracks. They cannot explain the Green Berets searching for a 6-year-old boy. David Paulides himself refuses to give a definitive answer. He lets the data speak. But he hints at possibilities. Is it a serial killer who knows the woods perfectly? Unlikely, given the lack of murder weapons or sexual assault evidence. Is it something paranormal? Countless hikers have reported a phenomenon known as the Oz factor, or the silence. They describe walking in the woods when suddenly, all sound stops. The birds stop singing. The wind dies. The air becomes heavy and electric. A feeling of dread washes over them, the distinct sensation of being watched by a predator they cannot see. Jan Maccabee, a bow hunter in Ohio, experienced this in 2010. Sitting in her tree stand, the woods went silent. She looked down and saw a strange, shimmering distortion in the branches, a cloaked figure, blending in with the leaves, watching her. She snapped a photo. It shows a face, barely visible, peering from the gloom. Is it Bigfoot? An ancient creature that knows how to move without sound? Is it something extraterrestrial, harvesting human beings for unknown reasons? Or are there thin spots in reality, portals, where people simply step through and are lost to another dimension? The investigations of the missing 411 phenomena do not aim to stop you from visiting the national parks. These places are the heritage of the world, beautiful and wild. But they serve as a warning. The wilderness is not a theme park. It is indifferent to your life. It is vast, ancient, and keeps its secrets well. When you step into the tree line, you are entering a domain that does not belong to humanity. So, be vigilant. Carry a personal locator beacon. Never hike alone. And if the woods suddenly go silent, if the birds stop singing and the air turns heavy, do not wait to find out why. Turn around. And run. Because in the national parks of North America, you may be the one watching the scenery, but you can never be sure what is watching you.